The air in the makeshift officers' club at Forward Operating Base Blackhorse was a physical entity, a thick, greasy soup of stale beer, diesel fumes, and the fine, ever-present grit of the Kandahar desert. It coated the tongue and clung to the back of the throat, a taste of exile and institutional boredom. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary, monotonous tune from behind wire cages, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the ghosts of 1,000 identical nights. The floor was scarred plywood, stained with the rings of countless wet glasses and the muddy boot prints of men who carried the weight of a forever war on their shoulders. It was a place built for temporary permanence, a purgatory of metal shipping containers and sandbags that had long since forgotten the meaning of the word temporary. Laughter, when it came, was loud and brittle, a desperate sound meant to punch through the oppressive silence of the surrounding wastes, a shield against the creeping suspicion that they were all just actors in a play whose final act had been written long ago, and not in their favor. Into this cathedral of masculine anxiety strode Brigadier General Marcus Thorne. He did not simply enter a room, he conquered it. His arrival was an event, a ripple of displaced air and shifting attention. He was a man sculpted from the very granite of military tradition, or at least that was the image he so carefully cultivated. His jaw was a fortress, his eyes the color of a stormy sea, and his uniform was so crisply starched it seemed capable of stopping shrapnel. A single, freshly awarded star gleamed on his collar, a tiny silver nova that he polished with the friction of his own immense pride. He had just returned from a decisive engagement, a minor skirmish that his reports had already begun to mythologize into a battle worthy of the history books. His voice, a resonant baritone honed by years of shouting over the roar of engines and the din of command tents, boomed across the cramped space, seizing the conversational territory like a well-executed flanking maneuver. He was followed by a small coterie of sycophantic junior officers, young men who orbited him like nervous moons, their faces a mixture of admiration and fear. Thorne was a connoisseur of attention, and the room gave it to him willingly. He held court near the pathetic excuse for a bar, a plank of wood laid over 2 oil drums, and began to recount his recent triumph. His hands carved the air, illustrating troop movements and enemy ineptitude. He was Achilles, recounting his glories to the lesser Greeks. His narrative was a masterpiece of self-aggrandizement, where every decision he made was touched by genius and every stroke of luck was a testament to his prescient command. The men around him listened, some with genuine awe, others with the practiced patience of subordinates who understood that their careers depended on their ability to feign fascination. The general was the sun, and they were all expected to be sunflowers, turning their heads to follow his brilliant, self-satisfied arc across the sky. In a dark corner, away from the gravitational pull of the general's ego, a figure sat in near-total stillness. She was so quiet, so utterly unassuming, that she seemed to be a deliberate rejection of the room's entire ethos. She wore simple, unadorned fatigues, the kind worn by embedded contractors or civilian support staff, with no name tape and no insignia of rank. They were clean but worn, practical garments that spoke of function over form. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot at the nape of her neck, revealing a face that was plain in its symmetry, a face one might easily forget. She held a glass of water, condensation beating on its side, and watched the condensation, not the room. Her stillness was not passive. It was predatory. It was the coiled quiet of a lioness observing a herd, a state of absolute energy potential held in perfect, frictionless check. She did not seem to be ignoring the general so much as classifying him, analyzing his bluster and his followers' reactions as data points in a complex, uninteresting equation. To the casual observer, she was a non-entity, a piece of background scenery. A logistical clerk, perhaps, or a linguist waiting for a flight. A nobody. This was Dr. Evelyn Reed, and the anonymity was her most effective weapon. It was inevitable that Thorne's roving gaze, sweeping his domain for any sign of dissent or inattention, would eventually snag upon her. He paused mid-sentence, his anecdote about outsmarting an insurgent commander left hanging in the thick air. His eyes narrowed. In his world, the world he had so carefully constructed, there were only 2 categories of people: those who admired him and those who were beneath his notice. This woman, with her profound and unsettling lack of reaction, fit into neither. Her quiet corner was a pocket of resistance, an unsaluted flag on his conquered hill. It was an affront, a subtle but unmistakable challenge to the fragile architecture of his authority. He gestured with his chin, a movement of pure, uncut condescension. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he boomed, his voice dripping with theatrical curiosity. The laughter around him died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Every eye in the room swiveled from the general to the woman in the corner. She did not look up. She continued to study her glass of water as if it held the secrets of the universe. This, of course, only fanned the flames of his irritation. He thrived on reaction, on the flustered compliance of subordinates and the nervous deference of strangers. Her calm was a vacuum, and his ego abhorred it. He strode toward her, his boots thudding on the plywood with deliberate weight. His acolytes followed a few paces behind, a pack of jackals eager to watch their alpha male assert his dominance. He stopped directly in front of her table, casting her in his considerable shadow. The smell of his cologne, an aggressive, spicy scent, momentarily overpowered the room's ambient stench of stale existence. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, the words a demand, not a pleasantry. "I'm Brigadier General Thorne. I'm the one who keeps this whole sandbox from collapsing in on itself." "And you are?" Dr. Reed finally lifted her head. Her eyes were a pale, dispassionate gray, the color of a cloudy sky over a winter ocean. They held no fear, no deference, no anger. They held nothing but a kind of clinical assessment, as if she were a biologist examining a particularly loud and colorful insect. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. The silence stretched, becoming thin and taut. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. "Reed," she said. Her voice was low and even devoid of inflection. It was a statement of fact, offered with the same emotional weight one might use to state the atmospheric pressure. Thorne's smile was a tight, predatory thing. "Reed? Just Reed? No title? No rank? Are you a contractor, sweetheart? Here to fix the latrines?" A few of his followers snickered, the sound ugly and forced. They were taking their cues from him, reinforcing his aggression. Reed's expression did not change. It was like watching a wave break against a cliff face. The water churned and foamed, but the rock remained utterly unmoved. "I'm here to observe," she stated simply. "Observe?" Thorne scoffed, placing his hands on his hips in a classic pose of manufactured authority. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. "Observe what? How real soldiers operate. You need to understand something, lady. This is the pointy end of the spear. This is a man's world. We don't have time for observers, especially ones who can't be bothered to show a little respect for the chain of command." He tapped the silver star on his own collar. "See this? This means you stand up when I'm talking to you." She did not stand. She did not flinch. She did not even blink. She simply held his gaze, her own eyes remaining placid, analytical. This absolute refusal to play by his rules, to give him the reaction he craved, was maddening to him. It was as if he were shouting at a mountain. His face began to flush a dull, angry red. He was losing control of the encounter, and in front of his men. The humiliation was a hot poker in his gut. He reached out, his hand a blur of frustrated motion, and knocked her glass over. Water and ice skittered across the small table, dripping onto the floor. It was a petulant, childish act, the last resort of a bully who had failed to intimidate with words. He expected her to gasp, to jump back, to show some flicker of emotion. She did none of those things. Her gaze dropped from his face to the spilled water, then back to his face. A flicker of something that might have been disappointment, or perhaps just weary resignation, crossed her features for a fraction of a second before vanishing. "That was unnecessary, General," she said. her tone still perfectly level, as if commenting on a minor breach of protocol in a training exercise. "What's unnecessary?" he snarled, jabbing a finger toward her. "Is your presence here? Who's this brat? Who authorized you? I want a name. I want it now. Or I'll have you on the next flight back to whatever civilian hellhole you crawled out of." The confrontation had reached its apex. The air was electric with unspoken violence. Thorne stood over her, puffed up with rage and wounded pride, a caricature of military power. Reed sat calmly amidst the small puddle of his making, a portrait of unnerving composure. The onlookers were frozen, caught between the fear of their commander's wrath and a dawning, terrifying curiosity about the woman who refused to be cowed by it. They were witnessing a collision of two opposing forces: the loud, fragile authority of rank versus the silent, immovable authority of something else, something they did not yet understand. And then the world ended. It began not with a bang, but with a sudden, profound silence. The weary hum of the fluorescent lights vanished. The rattling air conditioner choked and died. The low thrum of the base's generators, a constant, unnoticed feature of life at FOB Blackhorse, ceased. For a single, heart-stopping second, the only sound was the drip of water from Reed's table. Then, the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a hellish, pulsating red glow. A klaxon began to scream, a high, piercing wail that vibrated in the teeth and bones. It was the sound of catastrophic failure. Panic, a cold and greasy serpent, slithered through the room. Men who faced enemy fire without flinching now looked around with wide, frightened eyes. This was different. This was not the familiar threat of bullets and bombs. This was the collapse of the technological shell that kept them alive in this hostile land. This was the nervous system of the base being ripped out. "Report," Thorne bellowed, his voice tight with a fear he was trying to mask with volume. He fumbled for the radio on his belt, his fingers suddenly clumsy. He keyed the microphone. "Command, this is Black Horse 6. What's our status?" "Over." Static. Nothing but the hiss of dead air. One of his aides, a young captain with a face now the color of ash, scrambled to his side. "Sir, all comms are down. The entire C4I network is dark. No radar, no satellite, no battlefield comms. We're blind, sir. Completely blind." Thorne's face, illuminated by the rhythmic strobing of the red lights, was a mask of disbelief turning rapidly to terror. His authority, his entire identity, was built upon the systems that had just vanished. He was a commander with no ability to command, a king whose throne had just been vaporized beneath him. He began shouting orders, but they were the wrong orders, the panicked, by-the-book reactions of a man flailing in the dark. "Get me a runner to the TAC Ops Center. Secure the perimeter. Someone get the hardlines working." His orders were useless. His men milled about in confusion, their training insufficient for a crisis of this magnitude. They were cogs in a machine that had just been smashed to pieces. The loud, confident general had evaporated, replaced by a frightened man shouting into a void. His bluster was revealed for what it was: a thin veneer over a core of profound incompetence when faced with the unfamiliar. He was a swordsman brought to a gunfight, a cavalry officer facing a tank. The world had changed in an instant, and it had left him behind. It was into this chaos that Dr. Evelyn Reed moved. She rose from her chair, not with haste, but with a fluid, economical grace that was mesmerizing. The frantic energy of the room seemed to part around her, repelled by the bubble of absolute calm she projected. She walked past the frozen, gaping General Thorne without a glance, her footsteps sure and silent on the scarred plywood. She moved toward a hardened communications locker in the corner of the room, a piece of equipment no one had paid any mind to. From a pocket in her fatigue pants, she produced a small, unassuming keycard and swiped it. The locker hissed open, revealing not radios or field phones, but a rack of servers and a single, ruggedized laptop terminal. She pulled a worn leather satchel from under her arm, a bag that had seemed as nondescript as she was. From it, She produced the laptop, a matte black device with no logos and a tangle of specialized cables. Her fingers, which had been so still just moments before, now became a blur of controlled motion. She jacked a cable into a port on the server rack, her movements precise and practiced, the actions of a surgeon or a concert pianist. The laptop screen flickered to life, not with a familiar operating system, but with lines of stark green text scrolling against a black background. It was a language no one in the room understood, a secret dialect of the digital world. One of Thorne's aides, a lieutenant, finally shook himself from his stupor. "Mom, that's classified equipment. You are not authorized." Reed did not even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard with impossible speed. She spoke, and her voice cut through the blare of the klaxon and the rising murmur of panic like a laser. It was the same low, even voice, but now it was infused with an authority that was absolute and undeniable. It was the authority not of rank, but of pure, unadulterated competence. "Captain," she said, her gaze never leaving the screen, "get me a direct feed from the base's primary power conduit. I need real-time voltage and amperage readings. Now." The captain blinked, confused. I don't know how." "Then find someone who does," she snapped, the words like chips of ice. "You have 60 seconds before the backup batteries are fried by cascading power surges." Her certainty was so total, her command so direct, that the captain simply obeyed. He turned and ran from the room, shouting for an engineering NCO. Thorne watched, his mouth agape, his own authority utterly usurped. He was a spectator in his own command post. "You," Reed said, pointing a finger at another officer without looking at him, "get to the motor pool. I want every vehicle with a satellite uplink powered on, but do not attempt to establish a connection. Just power them on. I'll be borrowing their bandwidth." That officer, too, simply turned and ran. What followed was a masterclass in crisis management, a symphony of technical brilliance conducted by a lone, unassuming woman in a dark corner of a failing outpost. For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Evelyn Reed single-handedly fought a war that no one else in the room could see. Her quiet commands, spoken in a calm monotone, rewove the fabric of the base's reality. She spoke a foreign language of expertise, a torrent of technical jargon and strategic imperatives that silenced the amateurs. Isolating the primary network node. They're using a polymorphic worm to burrow into the firewall. Cute, a few keystrokes. Firewall bypassed. I'm routing them into a honeypot server. Let them play in the sandbox for a minute, her fingers danced. Okay, motor pool, I have your uplinks. Piggybacking a signal through a Chinese commercial satellite. They won't be looking for us there, she paused, her head cocked as if listening to something far away. The drone swarm is talking to its controller on a high-frequency encrypted channel. I'm spoofing the controller's handshake protocol. Give me 30 seconds. The men in the room could only watch, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and a dawning, profound sense of their own inadequacy. They were warriors of blood and iron, and they were witnessing a new kind of combat, fought with logic bombs and encrypted data packets. Reed was not a soldier. She was something more. She was a ghost in the machine, a digital warrior exorcising the demons that had possessed their systems. She moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and beautiful. She was not just fixing a problem. She was displaying an art form. General Thorne stood frozen, a statue of obsolete power. His entire worldview was being dismantled before his eyes. The swagger, the arrogance, the bedrock certainty of his own importance. It was all sand, and the tide of this woman's competence was washing it away. He had called her a brat. He had mocked her. And now, the survival of his entire command depended on her. The humiliation was a cold, physical weight in his stomach, so heavy he could barely breathe. Suddenly, a single monitor on the wall, one that had been dark since the attack began, flickered to life. It showed a static-filled image that slowly resolved into a face. It was a craggy, grim face, one known to every single person in the American military. The face of General Shepard, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was in his office in the Pentagon, the background unmistakable. The room fell into a silence so deep it was almost painful. The sight of the highest-ranking officer in the military appearing on a screen in their darkened, besieged club was a shock to the system. Shepard's eyes were grim. He looked tired, but his gaze was as sharp as a diamond drill. Thorne, jolted back to life by the appearance of his ultimate superior, instinctively puffed out his chest. He took a step forward, ready to report, to try and reclaim some shred of his shattered authority. "General Shepard, sir. This is Brigadier General Thorne at FOB Blackhorse. We are under." Shepard's eyes flicked past Thorne as if he were a piece of furniture. His gaze locked onto the woman at the terminal. He did not address the general. He did not acknowledge his existence. His voice, crisp and clear despite the precarious connection she had forged, was directed only at her. "Director Reed," Shepard said, his tone one of immense respect, the kind a soldier reserves for a legend. "Status report. Is Blackhorse secure?" The words descended on the room like a physical blow. "Director. Not ma'am. Not Reed. Director Reed." The title resonated with a weight that dwarfed the single star on Thorne's collar. Reed, without taking her eyes from her screen, replied in her calm, clinical tone. "Network integrity is at 70% and rising, General. The external threat has been neutralized. I've hijacked the enemy drone swarm and sent it on a new flight path directly into the nearest mountain. The internal worm has been quarantined and is currently being disassembled for analysis. We'll have their digital fingerprints within the hour. Blackhorse is secure. The Ghost is back online." The Ghost. The name hung in the air, an impossible, electrifying revelation. Every officer in that room, from the lowest lieutenant to General Thorne himself, had heard the stories. They were the modern fables of the intelligence community, whispered in secure facilities and classified briefings. The Ghost was a phantom, a legend, the architect of America's most secret and successful cyber warfare program, a figure credited with single-handedly preventing 3 major wars and dismantling the digital infrastructure of a dozen hostile nations. The Ghost was a weapon, a mind of such staggering genius that their existence was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the nation. It was said the Ghost had more operational authority in a crisis than any 4-star general. It was said the Ghost answered only to the chairman and the president. And the Ghost was a woman. The quiet, unassuming woman their general had just publicly humiliated, mocked, and assaulted. The collective intake of breath in the room was sharp and ragged. The young officers who had snickered at Thorne's jokes now looked as if they had seen an actual apparition. Their faces were pale with a horrified understanding. They had not just witnessed a dressing down. They had witnessed a blasphemy. General Marcus Thorne stood as if he had been turned to stone. His face had gone from red to a ghastly, waxy white. The blood had drained from it, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The foundations of his reality had not just been cracked. They had been pulverized into dust. The Brat, the contractor, the sweetheart he'd accused of being there to fix the toilets. She was the Ghost, the woman whose quiet, analytical gaze now seemed to him like the judgment of a god. He felt a profound, dizzying vertigo, the sensation of a man falling from a great height. His career, his pride, his very sense of self, it all lay in ruins at this woman's feet. On the screen, General Shepard nodded, a flicker of a grim smile on his lips. "Excellent work, Director. As always, we are tracking the data packet you sent. It's already giving us a clear picture of their command structure. You may have just ended their entire operation in this sector," he then, and only then, allowed his gaze to drift over to the petrified form of Brigadier General Thorne. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a glacial cold. "General Thorne," he said, and the way he spoke the rank made it sound like an insult. "You are to give Director Reed any and all resources she requires. Her authority in this matter and all subsequent matters is absolute. You will treat her with the respect and deference her position commands. Is that understood?" Thorne's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He could only manage a jerky, spastic nod. "I will expect a full, detailed report on my desk by 0800 Zulu," Shepard continued, his voice like cracking ice. "Not on the attack. Director Reed will handle that. Your report will be on your own conduct prior to the attack. Every word, every action. Do not omit a single humiliating detail. We will discuss your future, if you have one, after I have read it." The screen went blank. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than the one that had preceded the attack. The klaxons had stopped. The main power grid, restored by Reed's unseen digital surgery, hummed back to life, and the normal fluorescent lights flickered on, banishing the hellish red glow. The sudden return to normalcy only served to highlight the abnormality of what had just transpired. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Director Reed, the ghost, slowly unplugged her laptop. She coiled her cables with the same neat precision she did everything else and packed them back into her unassuming satchel. She turned, finally, to face General Thorne. Her expression was not one of triumph or anger or satisfaction. It was the detached, patient look of an instructor about to correct a failing student. Thorne could not meet her eyes. He stared at a spot on the floor, his entire body rigid with shame. The man who had conquered the room with his voice was now rendered utterly mute. "General," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "Your primary failure tonight was not your arrogance. It was not your prejudice. Those are merely character flaws, and the military is full of them." She took a step closer. He flinched. "Your primary failure was tactical," she continued, her tone becoming even more clinical, as if she were delivering a post-action debrief. "You made an assumption based on incomplete and faulty intelligence. You saw a woman in civilian fatigues and registered a non-threat. You assessed the surface and ignored the substance. In a bar, that results in embarrassment. In the field, that results in a flag-draped coffin. You did not fail because you were rude. You failed because you were a bad soldier." Each word was a perfectly placed scalpel, cutting away the last vestiges of his pride, laying bare the pathetic insecurity beneath. She was not punishing him. She was educating him, and the lesson was excruciating. She paused, letting the weight of her diagnosis settle. "General Shepard is a politician. He thinks in terms of careers and reports. I am an operator. I think in terms of assets and liabilities. Right now, General, you are a liability. A court-martial would be a waste of resources. Your resignation would be an easy way out. Neither is an acceptable outcome." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time he forced himself to meet her gaze. He saw no malice in her pale gray eyes, only a formidable, unyielding intelligence. "So this is what is going to happen," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a command meant only for him, yet heard by everyone. "Effective immediately, you are assigned to my staff as my personal military liaison. Your new duties will consist of carrying my equipment, ensuring my logistical needs are met, and standing quietly in the corner of rooms while I work. You will see firsthand what modern warfare actually looks like. You will learn the difference between the authority that is given to a uniform and the authority that is earned through competence. You will learn to see the threat and the asset that doesn't look the part. This will be your penance. And this will be your re-education. It will begin now. My satchel is heavy." She held out the worn leather bag. For a long moment, Thorne did not move. The entire room watched, breathless. This was the final, ultimate humiliation. To be reduced from a conquering hero to a pack mule by the very person he had tried to break. Every instinct, every fiber of his pride-soaked being screamed at him to refuse, to rage, to fight back. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had no ground left to stand on. He had been so thoroughly, so completely, so cerebrally defeated that resistance was not only futile, it was laughable. Slowly, his hand shaking, Brigadier General Marcus Thorne reached out and took the satchel from her. It was indeed heavy. Heavy with the tools of a power he could not comprehend. Heavy with the weight of his own colossal failure. "Yes, Director," he mumbled. the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The story of that night at FOB Blackhorse passed into legend. It became a modern fable told at war colleges and in the hushed, secure hallways of the Pentagon. The details, as they always do, grew with each telling. The drone swarm became 1,000 strong, the cyber attack a nation-ending threat. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a story about the ghost who walked among them, a quiet, unassuming woman who could dismantle armies with a keyboard. And it was a story about the loud, arrogant general who learned the hardest lesson of his life, that the nature of power had changed. Marcus Thorne was never a frontline commander again. He served his 2 years as Director Reed's liaison with a grim, silent obedience. He carried her bags across 4 continents. He watched her brief presidents and silence rooms full of admirals. He saw her wage wars in silence and save thousands of lives with a few lines of code. He never spoke of his old life, of his old self. That man had died in the officers' club at Blackhorse. Years later, a transformed Marcus Thorne, now a respected instructor at the National War College, would stand before a new generation of ambitious young officers. He was a quieter man now, his face lined with a wisdom that had been forged in the crucible of his own humiliation. He no longer wore his uniform like a suit of armor, but like the simple work clothes of a public servant. He would always end his introductory lecture with the same story. He would tell them about a dusty night in a forgotten corner of the world. He would tell them about his own arrogance, his own blindness. He would spare no detail of his own foolishness, his voice steady and devoid of self-pity. Your greatest enemy, he would tell the sea of young, eager faces, will not be the one you expect. It will not be the soldier with the rifle or the tank on the horizon. It will be your own assumptions. It will be your belief that you can judge a person's worth by the uniform they wear, the gender they present, or the volume of their voice. I am here to teach you strategy, to teach you tactics, to teach you logistics. But the most important lesson I can ever give you is this: true strength is not loud. True authority is not arrogant. And the most dangerous person in the room is almost always the one you notice last. Let your actions, and only your actions, be your argument. Class dismissed. And in some distant, secure location, a woman with pale gray eyes would be watching the world through a screen of scrolling green text, her presence a silent, invisible shield, her legend a cautionary tale whispered in the corridors of power, a constant reminder that in the modern age, the most powerful weapon of all is a quiet, underestimated mind.